y'all! Welcome to the first episode on my new YouTube channel, Skunky Photos. And you may be wondering, what's Skunky Photos? Well, this is a name that I got from playing video games that I just kind of stuck with. It's kind of my nickname online, and this is the sister channel to my popular DIY vacuum tube audio amplifier audiophile channel, Skunky Designs. And given that I've been collecting and into photography for most of my life, I decided to branch off and do a vintage camera channel. And we're going to mostly be focusing on the earlier vintage cameras from probably the early 1960s and before. And mainly on mechanical meterless cameras. Although I do have a few cameras that have built-in meters, most of the cameras that I collect are the earlier meterless versions, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be reviewing this little Contaflex, and this is a very interesting little SLR camera that has a leaf shutter, which is very different than the vast majority of SLRs or single lens reflex cameras, in that it has a leaf shutter. And while it really complicates the operation of the camera, it was simpler to build than a focal plane shutter camera. And so several manufacturers in the early to mid 1950s started kind of experimenting with these with various levels of success. This camera was made by Zeiss Ikon, which is one of the premier brands at the time, and they pulled this off really well. Some of the other models weren't reliable at all, but probably given the German engineering and the quality control and the accuracy in machining, these Contaflexes, most of them are still working. Now, I will warn you, if they're not working, don't buy it. There's very few people that will work on these shutters because of their complexity. So when I get into the details of the camera, I'll show you why it's so complicated and why so few people will work on these or repair these cameras. And I've collected a whole little kit for this camera. I've got the two auxiliary lenses that were made for it, and it came with the little flash cold shoe. And I also have the film canister, and I'll show you how that works when we get into the close-up details on the camera. So let's jump into the highlights of what a cool little camera this is. Well, here's our little Contaflex, and as you can see, this is a really nice satin finish chrome. We have our shutter button in the center of the wind, which is very typical of a Contax camera. I think they used a lot of the cues from their earlier rangefinders, and clicks like that. This does your wind like that. I mean, a lot of cameras have the little lever wind, but this is a knob wind. We have on the top of this rewind knob, we have the film minder, where you can go like this and use your fingernail and set this on your film speed so you know what kind of film you have. And then it's got color and black and white and the ASA and stuff. And it is interesting when we look at this, the speeds for the color start at 4 and go up to 25. So that kind of tells you the age of the camera, because back then 25 ASA was a fast color film, which is kind of crazy thinking about today. And the black and white goes up to 200. So we're going to usually use, I like Ilford FP4, which is a 125 ASA film that I shoot at 100. And we'll get into films and all that in a future episode, but it's nice that you can set the film speed on here. And the front of the camera, it's got a 45mm f2.8 Pantar lens, which never heard of one of those before, but that's what these came with. And it's a front self-focusing lens, and these really aren't ideal while they do work, as you're focusing the camera, you're changing the optical formula of the lens, and it can't be optimized for every distance. And so normally these front self-focusing lenses like this camera has are optimized for around 8 to 10 feet for portraits, and at either end of the spectrum of their focusing range, they're less sharp. And that's just the nature of the beast with these front self-focusing lenses. Normally what you see on an SLR is when you focus the lens, the whole lens moves in and out for the camera body. But because this has a leaf shutter, that's not possible. Or at least the way this is designed, it's not possible. And as complicated as these leaf shutter SLRs are, there's a reason why they solidly mount the shutter and the rear lens group to the camera body. So the cameras in this time period started using this thing, an exposure value light system. And what it was you would use a light meter and it would give you a number. Instead of giving you like an f-stop and a shutter speed, it would give you, on this camera it's like, 3 to 18, and it's this little ring right here, and it had a little arrow here that would show you what you would set it to. And you would set that by pushing this little button in and then adjusting either the shutter speed or the aperture ring until you got the arrow to line up with the exposure value on the side. And then it would lock the shutter speed and the aperture together, and then when you turn this, it would turn both of them together. And to individually set the aperture or the shutter speed, you had to hold this little button in. And for a photographer that likes being able to just set the aperture and then the shutter speed, or set a fixed aperture and then change the shutter speed to match the light, it's kind of irritating because you got to push this little button in every time. But for an amateur photographer, it was handy that you could set this exposure value, and then unless the light changed, you could, rapidly change the combination of shutter speed and f-stop, and you would have the same exposure, but you could adjust the combination together. So there were a lot of cameras around this vintage that did this. A lot of them came with a way of unlocking that. The Rolleiflexes did and some others, but on this camera you have to push the button in to change either one of them. So it's a little annoying, but it is what it is. That's the way these cameras were designed. So the interesting thing about this camera is this little lever down here. If you hold it in, you can rotate the front lens group and it comes off the camera. And as you can see, there's the rear lens element. It stays fixed, and they made two different auxiliary lenses. Well, I wouldn't even say they're auxiliary lenses. They're different front elements that you could put on this camera, and one of them, they're both labeled Pantar, and one of them is a 75 millimeter. There it says 75 millimeter f4, and then this one is a 30 millimeter f4. And the way you would attach these is, if you look, there's like a red dot there, and so you line this red dot up with that lever, and then twist the lens and it would lock in place. And then you've changed this to the longer focal length lens. And same thing, you adjust the focus on the front, and because it's an SLR, you can see the change of the focus looking through the viewfinder. So this was a way you could get different focal lengths off of a fairly simple camera. And honestly, I haven't shot with these auxiliary lenses, so I'm not sure how great they are resolution-wise, but we will do that in the near future because I just got this camera about a week ago. And I haven't shot with anything except the 45mm lens that it came with. And again, I got this camera at a local camera shop for $50, and it came with this cool little, stainless neck strap or chrome. I'm not sure which it is. And then I've got these two elements. I found these on eBay to kind of complete the whole little set. So it's kind of a neat system. I think it's a fun little collectible to be able to get a whole little kit like this, and you're not going to end up with a fortune in it getting the full range of lenses that were made for it. So to open the camera back, it has your typical Contax dual lever things. You flip both these up and you twist that one and you twist that one, and the whole back comes off like that. And so on this camera, it's kind of unique. This is the back of the mirror. So this little back of the mirror fills up this slot and protects the film from light, because the leaf shutter right now is open so that you can see through the pentaprism and through the lens. So there's a sequence of events that happens when you push the shutter button. First, the leaf shutter closes, then the mirror flips up. Then once the mirror flips up, the lens timing system opens and closes the leaf shutter, and then the mirror stays up and the viewfinder is blacked out until you wind the camera again, which is one of the problems that kept these from being more popular than they were. There's no way to have an instant return mirror like a focal plane SLR has. So when we push the shutter, and there's the shutter, and you can see the lens is closed, the mirror's up, and then as we wind the camera, the mirror comes down, then it opens the shutter so you can look through the viewfinder again. And that's why these are so complicated, is it's got to close the leaf shutter, and then the shutter tells the mirror that, okay, the shutter's closed, it's okay to flip the mirror up. Then the mirror flips up, and then the mirror tells the shutter, okay, the mirror's up, it's okay to open the shutter for the time period. And then when you wind it, it has to wind the shutter back into the open position after it pulls the mirror down so the film doesn't get exposed. And on the lower priced models that attempted this leaf shutter SLR, the mechanisms were not made high enough quality, and they would get out of adjustment, and either the timing of the shutter would be off, or it would fog the film, or it wouldn't close the shutter before it pulled the mirror up, and all kinds of things happened wrong. And so I think Kodak attempted this with a Retina, and the ones of those I've seen definitely had issues with being very reliable. So I guess some of those could work, but a lot of them don't. The other interesting thing I want to point out, and this was a Contax only thing as far as I know, comes with a spool, a blank spool that goes over on this side that's removable, and it's actually in the other room, so I'd show you what it looks like, but it basically looks like just an empty 35mm film spool. But the really cool thing is they made these little canisters, and at the time these cameras were made, using bulk film was very popular, because you could buy like a giant roll of 35mm movie film really cheap, or a lot cheaper than preloaded cartridges. And so a lot of hobbyists would buy these big, 100-foot rolls of 35mm film, which I still do myself, and you could load them in these little reloadable cartridges. Now the cool thing is, if you look here at the base plate, and see there's like a little notch here in the inside of the camera, and this side over here there's a notch back here. Okay, when you turn this, that little notch area rotates. And this is why Contax has 2 of these on the bottom of their camera. And not only does it lock the base plate onto the camera, these little canisters have these little pegs here that index into those slots, and it pushes, let me turn this around so you can see, it pushes this one in, and then as you rotate that base plate, it opens up this little window that lets the film come across the film gate as you wind the camera. And on this camera you could actually put 2 of these in so that you didn't have to rewind the film, and it would just wind the film from one spool to the other spool. And then when you turn these latches on the bottom of the camera to open it, or to open the back, it rotates this back closed so that it's light proof and the film doesn't get exposed. And if you look at the back here, it's a little hard to see, but right here in this corner and then right over here in this corner, you can see a little notch. And I'll zoom in here so you can see that a little better. And then this little peg that's on the front of this film spool, it goes into that little notch, and that keeps the film canister from rotating and aligns this little window in the right spot so that the film doesn't get scratched. And the real advantage to these two is you're not pulling the film through those little felt traps like a normal canister has, and so the film's a lot less likely to get scratched, which was a real problem back in the day. They've improved the quality of those little felt strips, but the early little canisters were real bad about scratching the film, and that's one of the reasons they did it like this. And see, here's the other one sitting in its little place with the peg and that little indexing hole. So I always thought these were really cool, the way they have these little canisters. And again, these were an accessory thing that you had to buy that didn't come with the camera. And so, but you can still find those. They're still available. And then to put the back on the camera, you push it in like that, and you twist them like that. And so if this was inside the camera, that little action would open up both of the little windows, so then when you wind the film, it pulls it across the film gate to the next frame. So I just thought that was really cool. And Contax is the only one that has 2 of these little twist things on the bottom of them. Now, Leica and Nikon both had a rotating knob like this on one side that you could put a little canister like this that was made for their cameras, and it would rotate them and open up the little window on them just like this does. But Contax was the only one that put 2 of them on so that you could wind from one to the other and not have to rewind the film. So I thought that was kind of a neat thing that Contax did. So anyway, one of the other little features this camera has is it has this thing comes off, and I'm pretty sure at the time they probably made diopters for correcting your vision looking through the viewfinder. So if you wore glasses, you could get one of these with a little piece of glass in it that would correct for your vision. But this also holds this little cold shoe accessory on the top of the camera, like that, and then you could mount your flash up here. But I like that it comes off because I think the camera looks a lot nicer with nothing on it, like that, kind of naked. And they clearly did a really nice job designing this little thing, because in all the years that's been on here, it didn't scratch this at all, and it still looks like perfect. But I just think this is a really pretty camera, and it's clearly made very heavy duty. This is a 1.5 pound camera, so there's nothing cheap about this. And considering this camera is about 60 years old, the leather's all in perfect shape and nothing's really deteriorated, and it still operates very smoothly. So definitely was a high quality camera, and I'm sure in its day this was not a cheap camera. The other operational point is, this is the rewind button. So when you're going to rewind the film, it doesn't latch. You have to hold that in and then turn this knob like this to rewind the film if you're using a standard cartridge and not this little dual cartridge system, which I never used two of these anyway. I mean, it's kind of a neat thing, but I do use one when I'm using bulk film and wind it and then rewind it. And the other thing that was nice feature, the tripod socket is not mounted to just this base plate that's removable. It goes all the way through into the body of the camera so that it's really solidly mounted on a tripod. And that's really it for this little camera. So I think we're going to end this video right here. So as you can see, this is a really neat camera that's different than a lot of the other SLRs out there. They're usually for sale for fairly cheap, especially these simpler Contaflex Alphas, which I think are just a really nice looking camera. Obviously, it's condition. The other thing that a lot of people have no concern about, and haven't for a while when collecting cameras, is whether they come with a case or not. And a lot of people will tell you, oh, the case is worthless, don't, just throw them away or whatever. I honestly feel at some point in the future that having the case for the camera is going to increase its value, because of what I just said. People just throw them away, or they don't sell them with the camera, or whatever. They just don't have them. And I know a lot of the cameras in my collection, there's no case. So when I can find one with a case, I may not display it with a case, but I store the case so that in the future, if that does happen and cameras are more valuable, if they came with the factory little case, then I've got them. So that's one thing to look for. I got this at a local used camera store that sells a lot of vintage cameras. They sold it to me for 50 bucks, which I probably got a really smoking deal on, I think. And I got these auxiliary lenses that are mint, got the pair of them for $100. They're a little more hard to find than the cameras, because most people just bought the camera. And then I'm not sure how many of them come with this little cold shoe, whether it came with the camera or if this was an accessory. So that's something to look at. I think it's handy that it does come with this. And then obviously these little film canister things are extra. That was an accessory. So if you want to put together a little collection like this, you'll probably end up with $250 bucks for everything here in working condition, which for a little brick of a camera like this, I think is a good deal. And this is actually kind of a good starter camera for someone just getting into camera collecting. It's really reasonable, they're pretty reliable, and it's definitely a usable camera that you can go out and have fun with. So, hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please subscribe. Obviously, being a new channel, I need to get my subs up so I can start getting some more views, and YouTube will start sharing this with more people. So I need to try to get my 1,000 subs as quickly as possible. So any of you that maybe are watching this that are fans of my Skunky Designs vacuum tube channel, please sub just to help me get my subs up so I can get this channel rolling too. So again, thanks for that. And hope you all are going to enjoy this photo stuff. I think I'm going to have a lot of fun sharing the information I know about these old vintage cameras. And we'll see you real soon on Skunky Photos.